Go
Let's
for it.
go. All right, we're recording. Thank you, Brett. I appreciate it. This is Brett Roberts joining us on our Friday Arts Lunch Bunch. I'm Frank Korb,
Good morning.
and we appreciate you coming. We had some issues
Yeah.
with the last one, and we're this will be even better. So we'll
I think so.
hope so.
We got the practice run through. You know what? I'm gonna try to pull this a little bit closer. So
I did one of these once before also, and I found that the secondary one went way better than the first.
really?
So hopefully this is going to be just as good. So this is Brett Roberts, a Wisconsin-based ceramicist, and there's his lovely daughter. Which one is that?
Nelly.
Nellie. Oh boy, they're getting big.
Yeah, that's sort of a dated picture. It's 2 years ago now, almost.
Gosh. Brett was introduced to ceramics while in high school and quickly gained an interest for the craft. Decided to pursue ceramics in college with the hopes of beginning a career with clay in some capacity. He graduated from UW-Whitewater with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Ceramics with teaching licensure. Currently, he teaches 3D art at Waterford High School and makes ceramics in his home studio. Well, mostly. Where do you make most of your pottery?
Probably here now.
Yeah.
Probably home. Yeah. At school, I'll make it when I have time, but that, as you know, that doesn't happen very often. So
that is true.
probably
I also
home.
spent far less
What's that?
time at home recently.
Yeah. Well, I thought when I built this down here that I would be able to get in here and do more things. Problem is, if I do that before the hours of 8 o'clock to 11 p.m., I get interrupted every 15 minutes, and then you got to wash your hands and finish what you're doing. So I kind of don't do things during the day, and a lot of times by the time the evening comes, the last thing I want to do is come down here and start making a bunch of stuff. So
Yeah.
I also I'm underneath our garage. We've got our garage basement is not insulated, and so it's cold in here in the winter.
That's interesting.
And although the furnace is in here, so I can open up the register on the furnace, but it stays warm while it's on, and then as soon as it shuts off in about 10 minutes, it's cold again. So
Well,
usually I have to have hot water.
That is true. I think one of the advantages, though, is you don't probably create a whole lot of noise in the house being underneath the garage.
No, once I close the door, I can blast music in here during bedtime and no one can hear me. It's kind of nice.
Here's Brett's artist statement, and I really enjoy this. While I admit I have a very simple statement philosophy, I wouldn't even call it a statement, almost an anti-statement. You are the Dada of the ceramicist, the anti-art. There is nothing conceptual or even historical about my work. I simply like making pots. I am a clay nerd and enjoy the entire process from mixing one's own clay and glaze recipes to learning the extremely deep chemistry that goes into clay and glazes. The product I'm interested in creating is the one that has fairly simple, most importantly, comfortable form and function. I also try to create a more unique surface with textures and glazes that have a great deal of variation and visual interest by themselves. That is fantastic.
And I find sometimes I kick myself a little bit because I think that this sounds maybe a little bit snobby, but once you understand some of the glaze chemistry and what's going on in glazes, different types of glazes will start to stand out and interest you a little bit more. And I find that I don't think a lot of other people like my glaze surfaces as much as I do, which is funny.
The texture or the colors, or what do you mean?
Both, or the crystal growth that you get in the glazes, depending on the glaze chemistry and the firing cycle it does. Firing can have a very large impact on what a glaze looks like.
Yeah.
And the layperson doesn't always know that or understand what's happening in the chemistry. So yeah, sometimes I think I'm sort of rambling here, but when I'm looking at some of my thoughts, I get more excited about the services than I think people do, is I guess what I'm coming down to.
That's, I get that. I get that. Okay. Well,
But
here's some of
anyway,
your high school work.
yeah, so I tried to do a bit of a chronological thing here because, and some people that were in here before, I talked about, doing this as if I was talking to students.
Yeah.
And I like to show students some of my high school work because I think it puts into perspective some of the things they can do. I excelled fairly quickly, and these were some of the pieces that I made. I think I'm assuming in my final semesters working. And excuse me, I started as a junior. We had to take the Art 1 and Art 2, and then you could take more focused classes as a junior and senior. So I had fulfilled Ceramics 1, Ceramics 2, and then Ceramics 3 and 4 was a combined class. And then I believe these were during my senior year. We had sort of an independent study. And I had engineered my schedule in school so that I had a ceramics class. We had what we called portfolio, which was, I guess, basically AP, but we didn't offer AP. So it was just like you could put together a portfolio to apply for colleges. And then so you could propose what you wanted to do. And so I had ceramics, I had portfolio, and I had 2 study halls.
Oh my God.
I would spend 4 hours of the day in the ceramics room. Except for
Wow.
the days we played foosball in study hall. Sometimes I slipped out for foosball, but so yeah, I think sometimes I don't think my pots and my abilities in high school were like superior for a high school level. I think they were pretty good, at least in the what's the word I'm blanking on, in the group of students that we had going through there. We had like a little surge of ceramics students, probably a little bit influenced by the teacher that we had, but then we all kind of were friends and took classes together. So it kind of stuck that we went through all our classes together. But as it turned out, we ended up in the year I graduated and the year behind me, so 2005 for me and 2006 for the next class, there's like 4 of us that are doing things in clay right now.
That's fantastic.
Which is to me pretty amazing that you know maybe you get one student here and there, but there's 3 students from my year are either teaching or went on to do their MFAs or doing something in ceramics right now. And then 2 younger students, a year younger than us, they're still doing it. So we just have like this little ceramic surge at our school. And unfortunately that's changed and it's not the case there anymore.
Yeah.
They've got a great facility for it, but they just don't have a lot of the classes. So
Oh,
these were just some of the things that I think I want to go back to as a teacher and have students make projects similar to these. I think I need to push the students a little bit more to come up with some larger, more technically proficient pieces. So
I'd like to think that after we're all done teaching at home, once the kids, and this is maybe me being, I don't know, too idealistic, but I'd like to think that once they get back into the classroom, their little brains are just going to be wanting so much to fill them with new experiences and knowledge that they'll work really, really hard. And so we'll keep that in mind as we get through the rest of our next month of school as educators and students alike. So, oh boy.
yeah, hopefully. Although I've said this a couple times, and I know that us teachers like to hear we got a lot of educational buzzwords, right? And one of them is independent learners.
Yeah.
And I think we're finding out that that's a little bit more difficult than we thought it was, because maybe they're not quite as independent as we were hoping.
Yeah, a lot of guidance is needed.
Yeah.
A lot of hands-on, unfortunately. I found that where some of the ideas are wonderful. It's the follow-through that's a struggle, and I guess not realizing how important it was to be right next to the kids, and whether it's with ceramics or paint, just showing them how to move the hand or adjust the wheel speed or whatever it is. And so yeah.
Well, and be next to them to force them to try to excel a little bit, not just mediocrity.
Yeah.
So I've said to a lot of the students, and I understand it's not something that I'm downgrading kids for by any means, but the quality of work, I would say, in my classes has shifted from a high school level to middle school level.
Yeah.
So,
no, I
get it. When we're not there to push them to improve and improve and improve. There's still the 5% that are excelling and doing that kind of stuff. So
yeah. So this next piece takes us into your college work.
Yeah, so this is actually the tail end of college, and I kept out all the bad ones. Just put the ones that these are, I think, even on the next page, you don't have to flip yet, but these are sort of the pieces that I've kept for myself. And the perk of being at a university studio, at least at Whitewater, which was a very well-equipped ceramic studio, is you've got a lot of options.
Yeah.
And options that I didn't even know existed. And I'm trying to do a good job of teaching kids what some of those options are, because I had no clue. And these pieces were done in a gas kiln that we introduce a sodium solution. You spray it in the kiln, or there's other ways you can do that too. It's called soda firing. And that's where you're getting that warm flashing is the term that we use in ceramics for anytime you're using like an atmospheric kiln, that wood kiln or soda kiln or salt kiln, you'll get these effects that we refer to as flashing, where the flame and the solution that's now vaporized in the kiln are traveling through and changing the surface color of the clay. And so the orange and light orange and sort of white areas that you're seeing on the surface, that's just bare clay.
Wow.
And I really enjoyed doing that process. And part of it, I think, is I enjoyed being able to fire the kiln and do the gas firing, because we hadn't done that before, or I hadn't done that before as a student. So learning how to do that. And by the time I was making these pots, I had graduated, and the staff at Whitewater was nice enough to keep me on for a year as sort of a volunteer assistant.
Oh, wow.
Which it was official, and I think it was documented, but I basically helped them in the studio and didn't have to pay to work in there. And so
you didn't get paid either.
I didn't get paid, but I did, I would make stuff and sold for the pottery sale. So
that's good.
But that was at the same time I was substitute teaching for a year. So if I didn't have a sub gig that day, I could drive up to Whitewater and make some pots. And I don't know, for some reason, I feel like the freedom of just doing whatever I wanted to pushed me beyond what I was doing during my school time there, which I don't know why that should have been the case. I should have been excelling the whole time. But
yeah,
once I was done with school and I didn't have to, one of the things that I didn't really enjoy about the art program was having some sort of cohesive body of work. And I am sort of scatterbrained, and if you ever watched me work, you'll know, I've got like 8 different projects going on, because I don't want to stick to one sort of glaze or one sort of form or I sort of get bored of things fast. And so I want to try this now, so I'm going to try this. So these are, like I said, these were sort of the culmination of some of that soda firing and my college years. And what I was really looking at was I liked glaze and I liked the surface of the clay in these atmospheric firings. So I was playing with contrast. So I guess as I looked back in hindsight, the only cohesive thing about all the work that I was making and still kind of do is an idea of contrast, whether it's texture and surface and glaze and color or whatever.
Yeah.
That's about as conceptual as I think I can get.
Well, but that's great. Those are things that I think as artists, just even looking back at the simple elements and principles that we see, focusing on one of those as just the focus, looking at contrast, or in my case with artwork line, you've got things that really hold it together and create a good sense of strong, successful work. So,
and I'll just, as we're switching to the next page, that teapot actually was one that I submitted to like the Lark Company Craft 500 Teapots book, and got accepted to. So that was sort of in college. That was kind of like a big deal at the time for me, even though I'm pretty sure everybody that submits work to there gets accepted. But
how had I known?
So that now that I've got the book, and I keep that page earmarked just for fun. But I've never really done a lot of showing. Galleries and that kind of stuff has been very minimal. I did it here and there in college, because I guess I felt like we kind of had to.
Right.
That was a big deal. And now that's just not something that I'm really interested in. But some more examples of that soda-fired work, and some glaze work that I was really liking, working with this nice contrast between that warm, toasty soda-fired surface and that glossy green, sort of crystallized glaze that, depending on the firing too, had a lot of variation. So a firing that maybe was like a slower cool down or slower firing, I would get a lot more of that little crystal growth that you see on the bowls.
Yeah, over here.
And I think, if I remember, I'd have to look back to my notes, but if I remember right, a little bit more of a reduced oxygen atmosphere, whereas you're sort of starving the kiln of oxygen, helped promote that a little bit. And then the ones on the right there, that's a little bit more of a glossy surface, less of that crystal growth. I think that was a little bit more of a oxidized atmosphere. So you're not depleting the oxygen in the kiln. You're just letting it run, the fire run pretty neutral. And for people that don't know or don't follow that sort of thing in ceramics, oxidation versus reduction, the amount of oxygen in the kiln has a lot to do with what the work that comes out of it looks like. And if you're using a gas kiln with fire, you can change a lot of the variables just by, say, closing down the damper to the chimney and letting that fire eat up more oxygen. And the more it eats up, the more it can change the glazes. And surfaces, there's things that aren't affected by that as well. But I think that's something that a lot of times potters and artists, they start talking about oxidation and reduction like everybody understands what they're talking about, and they don't. And they just nod politely and okay.
Yes, I understand what you're saying, Brett. Yes, oxygen reduction. Got it.
Yeah. So long story short, the atmosphere inside the kiln has is a huge variable on what the work looks like coming out a lot of times.
So when you're even back in post college, right out of school, you mentioned check your notes. So even throughout all this, with really two questions here, as a firer, you had to keep notes as to, or for your own purpose, you kept notes as to what temperatures were and like time-wise when you opened or closed.
I would keep like a 2-page detailed log. I was actually pretty surprised with myself because I forgot how in-depth I was, and I'd gone back and looked at some of them recently. And at school they gave us a kiln log, to have like, it would have like temperatures and notes, so you could like put notes in like what's happening in the firing. I would keep track of, the system that I was using didn't have like a computer control. It was just knobs and burners. So, I would write down quarter turn open with the gas knob, 3/4 turn open with the air, light for 5 hours, let it sit overnight, that kind of stuff. And then I would even, I think by the time I was making these things, when I would open up the kiln, I would photograph the work just on a board, like all the work. I would take a picture of each shelf so that I could see, and I would pull them out and kind of try to place them where they were in the kiln. So as I took the picture, I knew where all the spots were, where maybe they would get the most blasted with soda, or maybe this didn't really get much soda, so this would be a good place for an all glazed piece. Or
Right.
I really liked the soda here, so maybe I don't glaze this next piece in that space at all because I want to take advantage of that. So that vapor that's going through the kiln is sort of traveling through all the pieces, almost like a river.
Yeah.
If you throw a bunch of big rocks in a river and that water has to navigate through, that's basically the best way of understanding how that works. And so I was pretty impressed with myself, actually, that I was taking all those notes.
You don't
Uh,
take those notes anymore?
I really don't. It's
Yeah.
mostly in my brain that I do it.
Did
And
you?
so what that means is I take really good notes in my brain, and then 3 weeks when I go back to do it again, I forgot how I did it.
Did you just, we'll move on in just a sec, but do you think that you used those notes from one firing and then when you put the pieces in for the next firing made, decisions based on that?
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's, wow. So you are the opposite of what we were talking about before as independent learners. You were an independent learner.
Yeah, I guess. But I probably wouldn't have done that if my teachers didn't say, "Hey, you need to fill out this log while you fire this kiln and pay attention." But
True.
they also they didn't have to tell me that 8 times for me to finally do it.
Oh,
So this actually went in reverse order here. Just a minute. I threw one in there that was done just before those soda fired pieces, and this is one that was in my BFA show. And again, that idea of contrast and playing with different textures and colors. The surface on the bottom, which is harder to see in a photo, especially over a Zoom meeting, is an extremely rough surface. It'd be like the equivalent of like a 40 grit sandpaper.
yeah.
I basically took a silica sand and black slip. I covered it all, that bottom of that piece in black slip, and I sprayed with a sandblaster all of the silica sand over the black surface. And so not only did it rough up the surface, but some of that sand also stuck in the surface. And so it's a nice dark, rich black, but then it has all of these really white, crystalline looking silica sand particles in there. And I had to make it in 2 pieces because of that. So I threw the bottom form first, did the sandblasting, and then I threw the top form and combined them.
This is a large piece.
Yeah, it's like 10 inches in the diameter, I think,
Okay.
in the base. And I know I was mentioning last go that this is actually broken. It's one of the pieces that I saved, but my daughter in the picture in the beginning broke the lid on it. So I've got it. It's like in 3 good sized pieces. I just have never bothered to put it back together.
So just the lid is broken or the whole thing?
Just the lid's broken. So the lid sits in a junk pile somewhere in my closet. And then the jar is just collecting. I think we use it for our cords or something.
Well, at least it's being used. What's that practice where the artist will take broken pieces and then using like gold, put them back together so you can, you seen that?
The clay people are probably going to judge me a little bit, but I don't know the name of that, but I know what you're talking about.
Okay.
I've seen it.
Maybe that's what you need to do with that.
I could, yeah, maybe so.
Or just super
With hot glue.
We got about 20 minutes.
Okay, we're good on time, I think.
Yeah, no kids to talk to.
So then moving into, post UW Whitewater, post equipment at my fingertips.
Yeah.
I had to sort of figure out not only equipment, but materials. I had to sort of figure out what I wanted to do and how I wanted my work to look. And I found out pretty quickly that once I started teaching, and this was about the time my wife and I were planning to start having kids, I didn't have a lot of time. And a lot of times I would make a bunch of work and I wouldn't get back to it for a week or 2 weeks. And I'd end up recycling some of it because it was too dry and I didn't pay attention to it long enough or come back and spray it. So I needed, what I wanted was I need to make some forms that require very little work after I've thrown them. And also glazing, when I was doing the soda firing in college, I would spend a lot of time on the glazing aspect, and I needed to cut some corners here and there, I guess. So I tried to do some glaze testing and come up with some decent colors that I liked that I could just use on a form by themselves.
Right.
And so you still see some of those textures and contrasts coming through in the bowl there, the serving bowl, but then in the jar, that was really where I had come across some different testing and came up with this nice little fake Celadon blue glaze. So when people say Celadon, again, this is something that ceramic people, I think, just assume everybody knows what a Celadon is. A Celadon's not a color. A Celadon is an iron glaze that's fired in a gas kiln that turns green or blue or sometimes yellow, depending on the atmosphere. But I didn't have a gas kiln anymore. So just using ceramic stains, I could come up with a similar color in an electric kiln. So I was using the electric kiln at the school I teach at, and I probably threw away 3/4 of everything I made just because I wasn't happy with surfaces or I wasn't happy with something about it. And it took me a while to finally arrive at some work that I liked. I was working a lot in porcelain.
Yeah.
And I liked that contrast between that pretend Celadon glaze and the white, really white porcelain surface. And I also like, talk about contrast in textures and forms and shapes. I also like the contrast in the touch. So the knob on that jar there, I've sanded to like 1,000 grit so that it's almost feels like glass when you touch it.
Right.
It's really, really smooth. And so that's another thing that I've sort of gotten into a little bit over time is almost sanding your work, the raw clay to be polished.
And then that raw clay is then still like waterproof, dishwasher, usable.
Yeah, it depends on your clay. A lot of low-fi earthenware clays, if you get them from supplier for schools, they're not vitreous.
Right.
They're not watertight. They require a glaze to do that. But this is a mid-range cone 5, cone 6 porcelain. And so that actually is watertight. It'll hold water just by itself. It's actually approaching more of a glass than it is clay at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I could leave that thing unglazed and it wouldn't be an issue. But yeah, I think there's, an assumption sometimes from people that you have to glaze your work for it to be usable. That's true in some cases, but not always.
Yeah. Well, and for you as a professional, buying the clay that's going to do, well, for what you, a professional, wants it to do versus when a student is just learning, we have to supply a lot of clay, a lesser expensive clay, so that they can just learn how to hand build or, heaven forbid, throw on a wheel.
Right.
Yeah. So.
And
then the body on that, the base is it a flat, kind of like a matte feel to it versus the glassy of the knob?
No, it's a total gloss glaze, and hard to tell in the photo, but like if there was texture or any sort of imagery underneath there, you'd see through it pretty well. It's pretty much glossy blue glaze. So there's a couple more things that I was experimenting with, the idea of making decals. And I think I'd mentioned last time that I was actually interested in buying some sort of vinyl cutter.
Yeah.
That I could come up with my own decals. But what I found really quickly was this took forever. And my goal was to try to eliminate some of the time I was spending on pieces, not triple the time I was spending on pieces. Right. So a cup like that, most experienced potters could throw that cup in a matter of 2 minutes. But then I was spending, 30 minutes on dealing with the glaze application and putting the decals in there. I really liked the surface. I really liked the patterns. Mm-hmm. But yeah, for me, it just was not conducive to, starting to have a life as a professional and family life. And a lot of credit to all the potters that still make a boatload of work that have families and other jobs because I wasn't cut out for it.
They grow up, Brett.
Yeah.
I mean, you've still got 20 years, but they grow up.
Well, daycare helps. So now.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, wow. And by the time that last one leaves, the first one's coming back. So.
True. Yeah, that's true. So some more, these pieces, I was doing a lot of cutting into the soft clay. So I'm throwing pieces right on the wheel, cutting into them with wires. I've got a couple different types of wires. The shapes on the top, facets is usually what they're referred to in the clay world, are just done with a cheese cutter.
Oh.
Which I've lost my cheese cutter, and you guys don't know how big of a thing that is when you're making pots and you've lost your cheese cutter.
Oh man.
Kind
This is one of those just a wire with like a plastic
roller.
Yeah,
it's just like it's like got the little handle, and then it's like this shape with a wire that runs right across, and I can just cut really easily. It's killing me. So I finally had to order one on Amazon because I don't know where mine is. But then the little cuts on the bottom, I've got a similar tool, this one here. And it has I don't know if you can see on my finger there, it's got a wiggly wire on there. And so I can get that texture on the bottom of those things with this. So this is like the industrial ceramics cheese cutter, that I've sort of not adapted, but adjusted a little bit to get the shapes and the textures that I want. But I really need that flat cheese cutter back because
When's it coming? When's your Amazon order?
I don't know. Next week, I think.
Okay.
It's not an essential item, I don't think. So moving on in my professional, this is sort of midway through me starting as a teacher 8 years ago, which is crazy to think. And now I took a workshop with an artist named Nick DeVries, and this was at the Potter Shop in Waukesha. And he makes a lot of really great pots where he's using a Sureform tool and then trimming his pots with the Sureform tool. And so these were the pieces that I made during the workshop with him, and kind of followed along his instruction on that Sureform texture, but just tried to apply it to some of my own interests and shapes. And so I think moving through all of these slides here, it's pretty evident that I don't make really complicated forms. They're usually fairly simple. I like them to be functional, practical, and I don't get too much into throwing complex forms. But then what I do to those things is usually what I'm more interested in. So this one took just a Sureform tool and threw them a little bit thick, and then went back in with that Sureform tool to do the carvings. And that's what all that little linear texture is. And then again, just a simple glaze over the top that I thought would work well with those textures.
Is it fairly smooth to the touch, or can one feel that?
It would depend on how much glaze is there. These are fairly smooth. You can feel the texture a little bit, but if you load the glaze on, you'd not feel it probably.
These are, we come upon these pieces with that great texture. These are the ones that I really enjoy.
Yeah, and so this was, and it's hard to see the texture so well in the video probably, but these were me trying to figure out how to use that same sort of idea, but change it up a little bit to be a little bit more fluid. And again, thinking back to how much extra time am I spending on these pieces, I wanted to make a similar texture that I could do right away and not have to come back to it and spend time carving. So I was using just a really thick slip that I would just blend up from all my recycle and run that over the surface of the clay while it's still wet on the wheel. And then these silicone brushes that you can get for marinating things, this is what I'm using to brush that in with. And so it's not like, it doesn't quite look like a brush stroke, but it just leaves this really subtle texture on the surface that I really like.
Yeah.
Similar piece here, using not the brushes in this case, but throwing the form, putting the slip on, and then I just use my hands to make the details, my fingertips. And
drag your thumb through that.
yeah, I think at the bottom, I just put my fingers on it on the side and work my fingers up, and then the top form, I'm just putting my finger on the side and just swiping up and rotating around.
Yeah, that
So
space between that red, I really enjoy how the top blends into it and then disappears. So again, you got that sense of contrast, the red against the blue,
Yeah.
vertical against horizontal.
Yeah,
So
I think so.
Not having a lot of philosophy behind it, you've actually got a lot of thinking behind it.
Yeah, sometimes it's, I don't feel like I'm necessarily being overly conscious about it. In my mind, that's just what looks best, that piece, and you've seen this glaze in a couple of the slides previous. It's two glazes. The base glaze, the first glaze, is that red. So that red, the whole piece was dipped in that red glaze. And then the blues coming through from just a commercial Amico brand black metallic glaze over the surface.
Oh.
So when students like this combo, and so when I share that with them, that it's black glaze over red, that's sort of like, it's an eye opener, but it's also my first sort of tidbit into glaze chemistry and how it's the chemistry that matters. It's not the colors, when you're mixing glazes that matter. It's not like paint, red and yellow don't make orange. The chemistry is what determines that. So yeah, I like the running. I like the movement of the glaze. I think that makes interesting visuals. And like you said, the contrast between that color, I think is kind of makes a nice focal point right there in the middle of the form.
These are neat pieces. I just want to let you know, I got a 950 I got to go to.
Okay.
So, and I know you got extra few, but
I got 10 o'clock class, so that's okay.
And I got a 950 class, so
we'll breeze through this quickly. But I will grab.
That's too bad, because these are great.
I didn't put this piece in the. I didn't put this picture of the piece in the thing. I should have. But some of the things I'm sort of getting into now. This is the. That's a horrible light, but this is the piece from that image.
Yeah. Oh wow. Oh wow.
What I'm getting into now is coming up with more crystal growth through the kiln firing, which when people who aren't really ceramics people start hearing about this type of stuff, they probably tune out and fall asleep. I'm spraying a lot of my glazes and doing layers of glazes. So for example, this piece here, and I'd have to check my notes again. I've been keeping notes on some of these. Probably has 4 different glazes sprayed on it. Wow. And so what I'm trying to make is, and I think if you could probably go to the next photo.
Oh, these are so great.
What I'm trying to achieve is not maybe the colors that I was getting when I was doing the soda firing back in college, but the same sort of variation of colors, where that sort of flashing idea, even though these aren't atmospheric firings, even though these are done in an electric kiln, they still look like they could come out of something like that, wood fire, soda fire or something. And I can do that with the spray gun, because the spray gun mimics basically what's happening in those kilns. The particles are traveling at a certain direction and hitting only a certain part of the piece, much like the flame would in a kiln. So a lot of these have 3, 4, sometimes 5 glazes sprayed on them in different patterns to make these different surfaces.
Do you have, like in your spray gun, do you just have a couple of containers set aside with different glazes in them? Or this is what I hated about airbrushing, was that constant cleaning of stuff. Do you have it set up so it's a little quicker than?
Yes, there's a company that makes it. It's probably more of like an automotive spray commercial thing. They've got what they call, you can just search like spray gun, disposable packets or things like that. And they've got these really easy twist connect cans that you can take one off, put the next one on, take that one off, put the next one on to the same gun, and not really have to clean out your gun. A couple sprays will clean out the previous glaze that were in there. And it goes really fast. And so I can have 5 or 6 glazes right in front of me, never have to clean the gun, keep them all right in front of me, switch them, change them really quickly. And that works really well. That
is good.
So here's another, this is sort of like the pinnacle of what surface I'm sort of shooting for. And this piece in the light isn't so great, I don't think, in this shot, but it's sort of this nice minty green with a lot of crystal growth. Yeah. And that crystal growth is something that is forming during the cool down. So in an electric kiln with some glazes, if they come out of a quick cool down, they'll be glossy. And I haven't fired, don't think I've fired this one in a quick cool yet to get the difference. But as that cooling slows down, there's a point where crystals start forming in the glaze, and they grow. They continue to grow, and they continue to grow. And the longer it cools down during that period, during that window, the more you get. So this surface would probably be mostly glossy in just a rapid cooling. But this whole piece has sort of this almost semi-glossy matte surface to it. And that's kind of what I'm looking for in my surfaces. And then also playing with the forms a little bit to just give them a little bit more movement, a little bit more fluid, and not be, so round and static as I've done before. I tend to be a really tight thrower. Right. So when we say tight, we mean like really perfectly symmetrical things and trimmed. And I find that it's really hard for me to make things. I mean, you see some people that can throw this really loose form and it just looks really great. When I do that, it looks like a cheap knockoff. I'm trying to come up with ways, and this is sort of getting back into that slip texture with the marinating brushes, to come up with more fluid movement in my work that still sticks with my tight throwing sort of style.
Yeah, that's a great piece.
So just some more of that slip work. And these pieces, the 2 pieces on the right, the cup and then that vase, were done at a workshop that I did with an artist, Stephen Hill, up in Dodgeville. And then the vase on the left is, me sort of applying some of those things. And I'm go ahead.
I remember last time you were talking about the amount of time, and I think it was this mug, how much time you spend on handles. Oh, it was this piece in the next slide.
Oh yeah, the handles are like, I'm really picky about a handle. I want it to feel a certain way, and I want it to be comfortable and balanced right. And I love the connection where that clay just kind of gets nice and thick where it's connected, but then the handle's this really thin, delicate extension. And it takes me forever to put the handles on. Making the handles is quick, but putting the handles on and making that thick connection by adding clay to it is like a 20-minute job for me. And probably because I don't practice it enough, I'd probably get faster. But I love them, but I hate them at the same time. Yeah. And even in that vase, I think I mentioned last time that those 2 handles took me, it was way more than a half an hour. It was like an hour to make those 2 little handles, because I made a couple, took them off, made a couple more, took them off. And
I just remember when we had the chance to work together, I remember you just working on the top knobs forever. That was something. All right, we got to wrap up in about 2 minutes. So,
we don't have to spend too much time. This was just something I wanted to show students if they were with us, the idea of glaze testing. And if you go through to the next slide, you can keep on going. These are just all sorts of tests that I've done in the recent future. And I think that students don't understand this quite as much, so I try to promote this in my classes with my students. and I think, is that the last one? Is there one more? It might be the last one. Oh yeah. So we don't have to get too much into this.
Wow.
There's the results of those tests. All of these glazes were done with the same base glaze. So I found a glaze that I wanted to work with, took the colorants out of it, and then added new colorants to make different glazes. So it's the same glaze makeup, just with different colorants added to it.
And that's all just chemicals?
Just chemicals, yeah.
Yeah. Do your students have the opportunity to mix up their own glazes a little bit?
Yeah, I let them mix up anytime they want. If they do some testing, I haven't done it as much recently as I would like to. But yeah, if they test up some good glazes, they can go ahead and mix them up on their own.
Oh, well, that's great. Brett, God, man, I could talk to you for another hour, but my students await me in 2 minutes. So
I'll get you off, and we'll talk to you later.
thanks, Brett. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you next time on Friday Art Lunch Bunch. Thanks, Brett.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.